That's what she said. So
I
she can't, I can source that.
I went to see my dad for Father's Day. We took a photo. They have a pontoon boat, so we took it out on
Damn it.
double
Ready?
curse gun.
Oh, excuse me.
Okay. Welcome back, Mr. Trott, from your vacation. I know you spent a lot of time on the TIA while you were away,
Definitely.
so we'll look forward to hearing what you have to say.
All right. You ready, Larry? Ready to go? Okay. Excuse me. Good evening. Traffic impact analysis, or TIA. That's a fun topic, and as the mayor said, you all may have been thinking about it over the past few weeks, or may not. So, some of the questions you may have: what is it? Why do we have it? What do we want it to do? Are we getting what we want out of it? And or maybe, why are the results of the studies not what was expected? I'll try to cover most of those. So, what can TIAs or traffic studies help us find? It's a tool to be able to use to quantify what the impacts of new development are. It can also be a tool to compare different development scenarios. You know, is this type of development maybe 100-home single-family subdivision? You know, how does that compare to a gas station or a new hotel? The TIA is a tool to be able to compare those different kinds of developments. So what are you looking to find when you do a TIA? Are there improvements needed to impacted intersections? Is this new development creating a increased traffic impact to a particular intersection? And if so, what are some ways to be able to mitigate that impact? You know, do you need a turn lane? Do you need multiple turn lanes? Or is it a through lane? You know, what are improvements are needed at that intersection? So what are the big inputs that go into traffic studies? One are traffic counts. So developers go out and collect a traffic count, or they have a consultant go out and collect a count at an intersection during those peak times of the day, in the morning and in the afternoon. Okay, so that's a one-day snapshot of what's going on. That's not a condition every day, just a one-day snapshot. Trip duration. Okay, you've got a 100-unit subdivision. How much new traffic is expected? So we use a national standard that has averages in it to estimate what those trips are. It may be high, it may be low, but it's an estimate. Another piece is where's the development located? Where in town is it? Is it on the east side? Is it near downtown? Is it on the west side? And then how many access points does it have? Does it have just one access point? If so, all the traffic's going to be focused to one location. Maybe it has 4 or 5, so that traffic will be dispersed out amongst those different locations. Another piece of it is trip distribution. Another way to look at that is where's everybody going to or coming from to get to that development? So depending on the road network, how many different ways there are, or maybe everybody's coming from a particular location to get there. So you have to make assumptions on that for the traffic study. And the other part of it is there's other development traffic studies that have been done where the development hasn't been built yet. So you roll that in there too, along with other town or DOT road projects. So there's a lot of different things that go into a traffic study. What is the unit of measure? How do you measure what's going on? There's different ways, different measuring sticks, different tools. So what the town uses is ICU, or intersection capacity utilization. Okay, that's a percentage. Okay, if 0% means there's no traffic, 100% means you're at capacity. Pretty easy to understand. The DOT uses delay in seconds. So on average, how much delay in seconds? That's something that can be measured in the software, but to me, it makes it hard to understand. Delay to one person, it'll be different. That may be short to them, but long to somebody else. So is that a good measure or not? A third one, this is one City of Charlotte uses, is volume to capacity ratio. It's kind of similar to the ICU percentage, but it's different. It looks at an approach to that. So there's 3 different ways, just in this area that are used to measure the impacts on traffic. So what's acceptable? Now that you know your unit of measure, what's acceptable? Well, do you want it to be the same all over town, or do you not? Currently, the town has different levels of acceptability depending on what the adjacent zoning is. So more intense uses and zoning, the worse or the more capacity or more congestion is acceptable. Out on the more, I'd say the outskirts of town where it's more rural, not as much. So what does NCDOT do? Because they're also a player. Most of the main roads in town are state-maintained roads. So what do? Well, they can require a TIA when the trip generation, as I mentioned, how much new traffic is anticipated to be generated, is that over 3,000 trips in a day. That triggers a threshold for them. Is it going to impact a TIP project? Well, the town has several TIP projects going on right now, so is the development directly adjacent to that? Is it going to have impacts to that? Then yes, they can require a TIA. Also, if the district engineer thinks it's going to be an issue, they can say, yes, I want a TIA for that reason. All right, so I'll throw out a couple of tables here giving you some data. So here's a list of some TIAs that were done, say, over the past 7, 8, 9 years in town. So it gives the name of the subdivision or the name of the development, about how many peak hour trips in the morning and afternoon, and then was mitigation required after they did the TIA. So you figure out if you have to do a TIA, you figure out what's going to be studied, and then you do it. Then once you do it, do you have to mitigate anything? Sometimes when you do it, you don't have to mitigate anything. So you do a study, you figure it out, and you're good, or you do a study and you figure it out, and you're not good, and then you have to mitigate. So if you look at the table, was mitigation required? One little caveat to this is before, I'd say 3 or 4 years ago, the threshold to do a TIA increased in town. It used to be 50 trips in an hour or 500 in a day. It was increased to 100 in an hour or 1,000 in a day. Because looking at the data before then, a similar table, everything below that 50 and 500, there was never any mitigation. So the developers were doing a study, and there was nothing coming out the other side. So we have more data points now, and as you can see, there's still not many below, maybe that 150 threshold. So if it's below 150, you're seeing a lot of no's for mitigation. So they're doing studies, but no mitigation, okay? Now down at the bottom of the table, below the red line, those are developments where that would have been over the DOT's threshold as well. So they did a TIA to meet the town and for DOT. So if the town didn't have any TIA requirements, those ones below the red line, DOT would have required a study for it. All right. Now this may be a little bit hard to read, but there's a lot of information on it. So these are the list of developments, the improvements they would have had to do that are off-site. So when I say off-site, I mean it's not directly adjacent to the development. So if a development had to put in, a subdivision had to put in a new street, and they had to put a turn lane into the development, those were excluded from this list. These are improvements outside and away from developments. And then the last column is, have those improvements been built yet? Okay? So you do a TIA, but the next day, those improvements don't get built. They take time. And from what we're seeing, and what you can see on this list is everything from 2017 and later, if a TIA was done and approved then, none of that's been built yet. It could be that it was a rezoning, they're moving through the site plan process, they have to acquire right-of-way and do construction plans, and they just haven't gotten to it yet, because this stuff takes time. It's taking time. So that's 4 or 5 years ago, nothing's been built. But before then, there has stuff been built. Out of the ones that have been built, about half of those are projects that the town has helped deliver. So for the Huntersville Town Center development, that was a town development. The town was on the hook for building those, and the town delivered that. For Lake Norman Charter Elementary School is another one on here. The town partnered with the school to help deliver those, and took over that responsibility. I think the school offered some funds, and the town took it and then went and delivered those. So outside of those, there are a couple that developers have built. I think it's Valencia and Farrington. The one development, the Arrington or Barnett Tract one, they had one improvement. They actually escrowed funds with the town, and the town's about to get started. That's the Vance Road project. We're going to take those funds and go deliver that. That's another example of taking the funds and then going to deliver. But everything after that, there's either a partnership, like Burkdale Mixed Use, there's a partnership, but most of those other ones, we either have gotten money or they haven't been built yet. All right, this is a map of town. There's two different circles on here. Ones are the red hollow circles, the other ones are the kind of blue and purple ones. What this is a map of is what intersections would we consider studying when a development does a TIA. There's currently language in the ordinance that says if an intersection is within, say, an active TIP project, which again we have several, 73, 21, Gilead Road, do we want them to study it? Well, the TIP project's probably going to deliver more than what those TIAs will say have to be done. Or are there intersections where the town has a project or is building out to ultimate conditions? If we're building it out to ultimate conditions, why would we have the developer study it if we don't want them to do anything beyond that anyway? So those get excluded. So kind of comparing the two circle types here, it's not quite half. So about half of the intersections in town, we wouldn't have a developer study right now because they're either within a TIP project or we consider them at ultimate conditions.
Can I just ask one question? Can you clarify again? Red is, what does that mean?
Red means it's either within an active TIP project or would be considered at, I'll say, ultimate conditions, or the town has a project that's going to take it to that condition. So would we want a developer to put in extra anything? Probably not. So why have them study those intersections?
Okay, so on Beatties Ford Road, all these are town projects, but they're not red.
Well, I guess there's not a currently funded town project at that location, so those would be ones they'd have to study to see if mitigation would have to be done. So the purple ones are ones we'd have them study. The red ones are ones we'd have them exclude because somebody else is delivering, the town or the state is delivering something there. So, getting to the I guess, part for the discussion. So, what are some possible options? We can keep the Article 14 as it is. No changes to it. Looking at, the list of mitigation for development, do we want to raise that TIA threshold? We're seeing a pattern here that most developments below that 150 and 1500 threshold, not seeing a lot of mitigation required. So do we want to raise it to that threshold to, again, reduce the burden on developers to have to do the studies and then not have to do anything after that? That's another option.
Hey, Stephen, could you go back to that slide real quick?
Sure.
So what, for example, McElwain subdivision, and then the Barnett Tract subdivision, how is it with those low numbers? They ended up doing mitigation, yet others with higher numbers aren't.
Yeah, so when you look back at these different things that go into a development, each development's done on its own. So depending on the location, if there's not many ways to get to and from a site, all of that traffic has to go somewhere. Like, for example, McElwain subdivision, it's on McElwain Road. There's only 2 ways to go in and out of that subdivision. And most people are probably going to head to the east, to get to 21, Hambright, or the interchanges, or something. So all of that traffic's all going to one spot. If they're spread out, say it's in a different location in town, there may be more ways in and out of that development. So it disperses the traffic better. versus some of the, I think the Barnett tract was out on Bud Henderson Road. Bud Henderson Road, there's only 2 ways to go. So in those 2 cases, that traffic was focused, even though it was less.
Gotcha, thank you.
All right. So, again, going through some possible options, no changes. We could raise the study threshold to really capture those ones that really are going to have an impact. If we want to try to reduce that spread of how many intersections are studied, we could limit that. Right now, it's if you have more than 30 trips on an approach or 50 at an intersection, you have to study it. It doesn't mean you have to mitigate it, just means you have to study it. So sometimes that can be spread pretty far out. One example of that is the Burkdale mixed-use development. That's up there at 73 and Burkdale Commons. Their off-site mitigation was at Beatty's Ford Road and Gilly Road. That's a bit farther away than most other ones. And some people had a hard time understanding that because it is further away. Do you want to try to get rid of that question and just say, well, let's just study the stuff that's really close by? That's where probably most of the traffic's going to impact, is the stuff that's close by. So that's another option. If you want to make it easier on developers and staff, then just not have Article 14. That's another option too. Any questions?
Commissioner Munger.
How long does the TIA process take from our perspective? How long does the TIA process take from staff perspective, town perspective?
Staff probably spends, every development that comes in, we have to do a TIA determination. So that's about a half hour, 45 minutes or so to figure out, do they need a TIA or not? Then if it's a yes, then we have to do TIA scoping. That usually takes a couple of hours of time. It's more information to review. The developer has to put together a package of information to turn in. Once they do that, then they turn in the TIA. That could take anywhere from 2 hours to 8 hours to review a TIA, depending on how much they're studying, how many intersections and scenarios they have. So, and then every time they redo a TIA, we have to re-look at everything again.
Yeah.
Some of those TIAs can be 100 pages long. Some can be thousands of pages long. So it just depends on how those bigger developments, they have more stuff to look at. So,
Is there an associated fee with TIA?
yes, there is. When the town took over, I guess, the review of plans and stuff from the county a couple years ago, we did adopt a review fee for those. So yes, the town currently has a fee to review TIAs.
What is that?
It's $5 per trip. So it's based on how much traffic is generated from the development,
Okay, so
to try to estimate the amount of time. So you would think the more traffic something generates, the more time it's going to take to review it. So that's the correlation.
So using that 150 peak hour, you're looking at $750 fee?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Commissioner Walsh.
Is there I was thinking back to the McElwain example. So is there I think obviously the idea is possibly, hey, we need to raise the threshold because we're not getting a lot of value, say, below 150.
Mm-hmm.
But then is there another way to look at that and say, in the example of McElwain, there's only really one way in and out. We kind of know they're going to head east. To say, I mean, I would hate to have lost the benefit of whatever improvements there were. Now, if there's 5 ways out and it's 150 trips, it probably is a waste of time. But is there another way to add in something into that formula to ensure that what little benefit we get out of the TIA we can use?
I guess I'd have to look at that a little bit more to see if there's a way to try to quantify that. If there's a limited number of ways in and out, we'll have to look at some wording to tweak that. I don't have anything on that one.
I got
Good
you.
question.
Commissioner Hines.
Thank you for all this. Following up on Commissioner Munger's question, once the scope is identified by staff, how long does it take an applicant typically to go through and resubmit the TIA documents to staff?
But it can vary if they've got somebody just sitting there waiting on it. You know, it could take them a few weeks to do. What we're finding is it usually takes a couple of months to turn that around
Okay.
from developer.
So let's say for the TIA comes back to staff and the TIA identifies we need a left turn lane here. DOT has the ability, they also look at that TIA and they can object to it or allow it. Is that correct?
Or concur with it, yes.
What happens if an applicant doesn't have the ability to obtain right of way? Do we already assume the ability to condemn at that point, or do we just say that you don't have to do that?
Well, for the town, as I understand the process, the applicant has to offer to acquire right of way, and I'm going to look at legal to confirm that. But the applicant has to offer to acquire right of way. I don't know that the town has the ability to require an applicant to acquire off-site right of way.
That's correct. That's correct. All of the,
That's correct.
So I noticed on your map, if you could go back,
Sure.
downtown happens to be right here at Town Center, not here, but we had an applicant come in, TIA was required for a right turn lane in front of Cashins.
Mm-hmm.
So why would we go back and require someone else to go study this when this intersection's already been studied?
Sure. So when they study it, conditions could have changed. Okay, so you're taking traffic counts and you're taking a snapshot of what's going on. Conditions could have changed. There could be additional developments that are approved to go through there. So you take a look at it every time. Now, once the improvement is built, they could account for that additional turn lane. Say the town or another developer built something out there, conditions would have changed, and then you look at it again.
So with that intersection being part of the Main Street project, would that not be required because it is part of Main Street?
That's actually not within the Main Street project. It's just outside. Main Street goes around and goes up Main Street.
Do we
and comes-
avoid that part of Main Street, on the Main Street project?
That's 150.
It's just not a part of that project.
Yeah.
Now, it is or would be a part of the future TIP project to widen Gilead Road between 115 and wherever Commerce Center or the post office, where the other project stops. So when that project gets further along, it could be that one gets excluded once we figure out what the solution is at that intersection.
So let's just play a hypothetical. That intersection was studied. They can't acquire right of way for that right turn lane. I don't know what the status of that intersection is regarding that project.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say they can't acquire right of way. They made the offer. They cannot acquire the property. Someone else comes in 5 years down the road. They got to study the intersection again. Now they're willing sellers. They have to go buy it to make that improvement to get their project approved?
Well, if a developer offers and can't do it, then if they want relief from that requirement, they'd have to come back to the town board to get relief from that requirement or change that requirement. If somebody else happens to buy the right of way and it's now available, well, then the developer could take advantage of that and then go build it. Sometimes, to kind of play off your question a little bit, sometimes multiple developers have to do requirements or do improvements at the same intersection. And they could be even the same improvements. So developer on one side of the street, they've got to put in a left turn lane. Well, he hasn't built it yet, but then somebody across the street comes in. Well, there's nothing there. So they have to look at it as if there's no improvements, because you don't know if the guy on the other side is going to build it or not. So now he is also on the hook for the same improvement. They could partner together. One could wait on the other to do it. It can make it complicated to get those improvements built.
Sounds like it.
Yes.
Last question for right now, maybe.
Okay.
So as long as we've had the TIA and you showed the project list, do you have a cost of how much the town has been required for their town TIA improvements compared to developers?
Yeah, we don't have a cost on that. I know for the Lake Norman Charter elementary improvements, I believe the school put up $400,000, and then I think the town put up an additional 300 and some thousand. to go deliver those 3 intersection improvement projects. For the town center project, I don't know what that ended up costing, but we ended up putting turn lanes and then the mast arm signal there at Town Hall. So
I don't know why I think this numbers, maybe from a couple, 3 years ago, the numbers can clearly change, but I was recalling that the improvements that the town were required to pay, that the town has paid is over $4 million, where private developers are only like $400,000. I don't know if I heard that a couple years ago or if I'm...
yeah, we had a similar chart put together, and it had some dollar values on it that we were, for lack of a better term, guesstimating how much it would have cost. But we don't know how much developers spend on road improvements. We don't, because that's between them and their contractors and their team. They don't share any of that with us. We only know what we've spent on projects. So rather than try to just guess how much somebody could have paid, maybe we just took it off the chart.
And I guess I lied because I have another question. So sometimes RTIA, are they still requirements that NCDOT was going to require anyway?
I'd say for most of these, and it's throughout the whole list, the town improvement requirements are pretty much identical to what the state requirements are.
Okay, so if we chose the option of not having a TIA, a lot of these projects or improvements would still be required by NCDOT to the applicant.
Yeah, most of the ones, I'd say the ones below the red line, yes, because they would have required a TIA. They would have probably looked at the same intersections. They probably required the same improvements. Those things are pretty close together. Every once in a while, you'll get a little difference where the town may say, well, it's this, and DOT may say, well, okay, or sometimes DOT requires more than the town does. That happens as well. The ones above the red line, DOT would not have required a study, possibly, and then therefore they wouldn't have required the offsite improvements. It's likely they would have required improvements at the entrance to the development, which are excluded from the list anyway. But
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Boone?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Trott, I've got 3 questions. If you could go back to the improvement page, I think it's the next one.
yes,
The very last one, the Sanford Daycare, and the improvements they've got to make is a second northbound left turn lane on 115 to 73. That lane's already there. So there's really no improvement there and just repainting it, I would think. Is that the improvement?
the widening's been done, but they'll have to resurface and remark it. They'll also have to make some changes to the traffic signal equipment to get that in. So the cost on that one will be much lower than having to buy right-of-way, widen the road, do that. So yes, it's much less cost, but still an improvement.
Okay, my second question concerns the ICU rating for an intersection. And the state is that the seconds of delay, if we have a C intersection and the ICU rating, do you have the delay seconds for the state, what they might be?
It's going to vary, and one of the reasons why the town uses or chose the ICU methodology, and this was back probably mid-2000s when Article 14 came about, was the ICU methodology is not impacted by signal timing. So the delay in seconds, you can change the signal timing and make it look and work better, but you really haven't done anything. Have you really made it better? No, you've just played with some signal timing numbers that may or may not really happen. So to get out of that potential to tweak the numbers and kind of manipulate the results, the town, I believe, chose the ICU methodology because it takes that out of it. The signal timing makes no difference on what the results are. So you can't, I guess, play with the numbers to get the results you want. It's just straightforward.
And my final question is, we increased the threshold of maybe 4 years ago, where we went from
Correct.
100 trips and matched the state to 500. Am I thinking?
Yeah,
correctly on that?
about 4 years ago, the threshold used to be 50 trips in a peak hour or 500 in a day. We put together this previous table and showed that, well, everything below that line, there was never any mitigation, there was never anything that came about. So recommended to increase to the 100 in an hour and 1,000 in a day. And since then, as you can see, that everything, even some of those ones above that threshold, there's still no mitigation required. So, one of the options could be, do we want to raise it some more and really have those folks that are really doing an impact, those be the ones that do the TIA or not.
Thank you for the information.
Can you go back to what could be my second favorite chart with all the circles?
Okay. Sure.
So if I take away the projects that are in our CIP, for example, on Beatties Ford Road, maybe not funded, but they're in our CIP, 115, 21, 73, Gilead Road, and I take away all the intersections that we are requiring, but yet those roads are scheduled at some point to be improved, maybe not funded. There may be only, and it's hard for me, but maybe 10 or 12 intersections that are on nobody's radar to be improved.
Yeah.
I think that's
It's
I mean,
time.
it's
Yeah,
hard
it's
to
time.
count them all up, but, so, in essence, we're having developers, schools, and then ultimately us, if a school comes in, to study something that we're planning on improving, or the state is planning on improving within the next 5 to 7 years.
It could be. And over time, as the town builds out its road network, the number of intersections will continue to probably go down. It'll keep getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and then you'll just have a few here and there. That's probably the case. It's going to take some time to get there, as we know it takes a while for DOT and us to do things. But over the course of time, yeah, that list of potential intersections just to study will probably continue to decrease.
Commissioner Bales?
So then my question to you is, what is your recommendation? Is it a blend of the raise the study threshold and limit intersections to be studied? Or is it leave it alone or remove it?
I would say, looking at this table, to me, the recommendation would be let's raise the threshold to 150 and 1,500. It's still below DOT's threshold. To me, if we were seeing there's nobody having to do any mitigation until you get above DOT's threshold, then why even have this? Because we're not requiring anything more than what DOT is. So why make them jump through that extra step for no additional benefit? There are several yeses there once you get above that 150 where they do have to mitigate. So now if we get to a case where, one of the mayor's favorite graphics there, a case where those number of intersections is just a few, if it's just a handful in town, then why go through all of this process for maybe just a couple? So there's more than half of the intersections in town that we could still study at this point.
So your recommendation would just be to raise the threshold?
For right now, yes. But I definitely think it's
not
something we
limit-
continue to look at.
Okay, but not limit the intersections? Is
That would
there any
certainly make it
benefit?
easier.
Why not limit the intersections if you know they're on the radar to be improved?
We can. If we have and I guess in the current ordinance language, if there's a funded project, if there's a town project that says future year, we don't know when that is, and that could change. Also, if a project hasn't started funding with the town, it could change that next year. As part of that budget process, the town could take that out. Now, if it's within the funded portion of a DOT TIP, then we say that's considered funded because they're committing to deliver it, even though it may be, even though it may be 4, 5, 7 years before they do it. We're giving them that credit because that's the tool they have.
Commissioner Walsh?
Mr. Trott, the TIA only studies intersections, is that correct?
That's correct.
I know when we talk to folks as developments come on board and we talk about our traffic impact analysis, there's always this perception that you know, maybe we're doing road widening or other things. I wonder if, along with discussing moving thresholds, we ought to change the name a little bit and call it the intersection traffic analysis or something that.
That's what I just said.
Oh, did you? Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. I didn't hear you.
No, but, yeah.
Okay.
Words matter.
Yep. I can't hear them.
No, I wouldn't say to you.
Yeah, we do get questions from residents about, you know, what is this TIA? I thought this TIA was going to do X. And, you know, it was going to look, you know, somebody was speeding down my street. I thought you were going to look at that. The traffic study doesn't look at that. So we do get questions on when development occurs. What is the TIA? What does it do? We do get those questions.
Commissioner Munger's back.
Back for more. So one of the things I know that has been discussed is the possibility of doing a townwide TIA. And I realized that we couldn't recoup those related costs, but would that, the intent of that be so we could quickly turn around and just say, you're building here, we know that you're going to need a right turn lane and a left turn lane. Here's what you have to put in.
So you're leading to the next part of the discussion. So a town-wide analysis, traffic analysis of intersections. I think some people have said there's a town-wide TIA. You know, that could be something that's done. However, you would have to make assumptions on what development is coming. As soon as something changed in any of that, a developer built less or built more than whatever was assumed anywhere, you'd have to redo the whole thing because it'd be the numbers would be different. Also, as time goes on, traffic changes. You know, traffic last year compared to the year before, that all changes too. So I would say we would not be able to use that to say, okay, yes, developer A, you need to go do X. What you could do is if you wanted a snapshot of how things are today, okay, you go out and collect traffic counts and you just say, all right, we know what's out there today, here's what traffic is out there today, here's townwide what a snapshot looks like, okay? So that could be useful information. Are things operating well or not? Another option is do you take that plus all the approved TIAs that for development that haven't been built yet. Roll that in there and say, well, this is the stuff that's out there now, plus stuff that's approved, we think is coming. What does that look like? And that can give you another comparison. Okay, here's where it is now. Is it projected to get a lot worse, a little bit worse? You could use that to compare the two. Would that tell you, yes, this next guy, the developer that comes in, they need to go do this? No, it wouldn't tell you that. It'd just tell you where you are right now or where it could be if all this development gets built. Separate from a traffic analysis is something called a sub-regional model. So the Charlotte maintains the Metrolina regional model. So that's several counties wide. It's big picture looking at not volumes at intersections, but volumes on roads, like what's going on 115, for example. You could take a more detailed look, create your own sub-model if you want to take a more detailed dive into what traffic could become if certain development occurred. That will give you some more information, but it won't get down to the level of, okay, you need a turn lane at this one intersection and you're great. It's not that fine of a tool.
Okay, one more. Sorry. One of the things, one of the proposals you're putting forth is to change that threshold up to 150 trips. How do you determine that 150 trips if you're not doing a TIA on the intersection? If you know today, how would that level change in 2, 5, 10 years if you're not doing a TIA on those intersections?
So every development that's proposed, we do a TIA determination to see if they even need to do one or not. So we take an initial look at what use is being proposed. Is it single-family homes? Is it a gas station? Is it, you know, a mixed-use center? You know, and all the different uses that may go into that. So we figure out what we think the average daily average hourly trip generation for that's going to be. And we see what that is. If it's below the threshold, then of course we don't do a TIA, but if it's above, then they go through that process. So we do take a look. Even if you don't do a TIA, we look at that step for every development and see.
And that
what's in.
changes over time based on population increases and...
Well, the data does change over time. We currently use a national data from Institute of Transportation Engineers. They collect data from all over the country and put it together and then publish a book every few years. So the data keeps getting updated and changing.
Thank you.
Commissioner Phillips?
Did we do any TIAs during the pandemic?
Yeah, there were some TIAs that were completed during the pandemic. However, we used traffic counts pre-pandemic to account for that. Otherwise, if you said, well, you can't do traffic counts, well, then they couldn't do their TIA and they couldn't go through that process. So, say the town and also the state as well said, well, we know things are a little out of whack right now. Let's just use some counts from before that happened. We're assuming that after everything gets back to normal, it'll kind of be back to normal. So I would say now this fall, once school gets back in session, we'll do new traffic counts and then just go forward as we have been before.
And then something like today where, you know, we've had this mess on 21 and everything and the surrounding side streets. Let's say like one of them we're having a TIA done that day. Do you guys take into account that a massive accident occurred that shut down a road so these side roads or whoever is getting more traffic?
That's a great question. And so when traffic counts are taken, if a crash occurred like right at that intersection, they would notice it. And they'd say, wait a minute, we got to do this again. But say a crash occurred on 77, but I'm counting 21. Well, you may not see it or may not know it. So it just in the count data. So there could be a great deal of variability. You know, one traffic count at an intersection may show really high volumes. The next developer that comes in, it may be a whole lot less because of something else that happened somewhere else. That's part of the challenge of doing the traffic studies is you don't know what you're going to get until you collect the data and do the study.
And then my third question, I'm sorry. So the 6 to 9 a.m. and the 4 to 7 p.m., how do you guys pick? Because like where I'm at, Beatty's Ford 73, 6 a.m. there's not much traffic. And then especially when school's in session, anywhere from 6:30 to 8:15, it can really get backed up. So how do you guys pick what times? Because I know there's nothing fair in politics or in, you know, government, but if you get lucky and get the 6 a.m. count versus, you know, an 8 a.m. count, that can really impact the count as well, correct?
Yeah, there'll be some variability over that time. And so when the traffic counts are done, we'll have them count between 6 and 9, and they'll take the highest 1 hour out of that. So it could be 6:30 to 7:30. It could be 7 to 8. It's just that 1 hour, whatever the highest 1 hour out of that 3 hours that was counted in the morning and then in the afternoon. And it could be that it's 6:30 to 7:30 at one intersection. It could be 7:30 to 8:30 at the next intersection. And so you're looking for that highest time is what's counted to account for those changes.
All right, thank you.
Commissioner Boone?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Last question. I believe the Ordinance Advisory Board had a subcommittee to study the TIA. Did we ever get a report or any final action from them?
Yes, there was a lengthy report that was created, and one of the challenge, or I guess a couple of things that committee looked at were, you know, what's fair and equitable to everybody. You know, is when a developer starts down this process, they don't know what's going to come out on the other side. They don't. And is that fair? Is it fair that, you know, developments below the threshold don't have to do anything and ones that are above it have to do something? It's a challenge. So that was something they tried to tackle. One of the things that was evaluated and looked at as part of that was, is there a way to have a fee that everybody pays to make it fair? So the people that have a little impact, may pay a little fee. People that have a big impact, they may pay a big fee. But impact fees, as far as I know, in this area are not allowed. So, you know, I think they wanted to look at, is there another tool to use to be able to have a fee? And I think that was one of the recommendations, was maybe look at that some more coming out of that committee.
Thank you. I just have, I think, Anthony, did you have a question or comment?
Just real quick, if we raise the threshold, Stephen, could you do 150 to 250 we only review, and then 250 and above is DOT and we don't even look at it? Is that any help? Because they're making you do the 250 and above. Why are we reviewing that anyway? And we just stick to that 150 to 250. Just a thought.
Well, I have a question for you. So you have three inputs. You have your time, staff time, developer time, the cost, and you get an output, an improvement and no improvement. Do you think at this time we're getting the desired outcome, the desired output? Or is it, do we change it to intersection analysis and update it from the 100 to 150 and 1500?
I'd say we're getting some limited benefit from what's being done right now. It takes a long time. You can see from the chart I've got up there, everything from 2017 and later, nobody's built anything yet for one reason or the other, whatever it is. So it takes a long time to see the benefits. And then, half the time it takes the town to help push it across the finish line. So it's taking a lot of staff time to get some benefit out of having the TIA.
Do you have another question?
Well, I think you just kind of answered that. I think, but I know we have to look at the big picture. A lot of things would fall over the 150 or 1500, which would be like schools. Would that be an example?
A school, well, the state statutes changed a few years ago to where municipalities could not require a TIA of a school if the school is on a state road. Now, if a school is on a town road, the town could require that, but would have to, I think, reimburse the cost of the study and reimburse the cost of any improvements done. So you're kind of, the town would basically just be taking it on to do everything, at that point, if that was required for schools.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to see a little bit more, like, how would it benefit the community? Because what I'm hearing is, we're duplicating a lot of NCDOT efforts. We get very limited output from this. We're taking a lot of staff time. So, I've been involved in, I know the town has been involved in TIA for, I don't know how many years, 10 years. Being on this board for the last 3.5, we've constantly spoken about it. To me, it's clearly not working. I'm just wondering what's the benefit to us at this point. It's not popular because people think that that's what's causing people to get road improvements, but that's not it at all. So I think it's false sense of, in a lot of different ways. So, I'm more inclined to, let's just kind of remove it while constantly trying to figure out a different widget to benefit, our road infrastructure. We can't do impact fees. Our HOAB board, who is probably by far the most qualified from all ranges of businesses, they're even confused by it at times, and we just don't know what to do. But I think the time is kill it, try to figure out something to do in the meantime to kind of create a different widget, put it that way.
Yeah, I'll say the challenge for developers is they have to front money to do all this. So they have to pay to do the traffic study and then pay for improvements. I would guess that developers pass on that cost to the people that buy the development. If it's a single-family home subdivision, then they'll pass on that cost to those residents of that subdivision. Is that fair or not? That's a question. Would it be better to have an increased vehicle fee? The traffic impacts are created by vehicles. If nobody's driving anywhere, you don't have any impacts. So, is that a better tool to say, we'll get more money and we'll put it all towards road improvements and making it as good as we can, based on what actually happens. TIAs are a projection of what could happen, not what has already happened. So you're trying to look into the future a little bit and see what could happen, Whereas if you just analyze what's already happening and try to fix those problems, maybe that's a better way to go.
And I would just say from my experience being in the real estate, knowing up front what is required is much easier for applicants than knowing the unknown in the future and having to waste 60 days, 90 days, or whatever doing all this. That's why I was kind of disappointed we didn't have the right to do, I don't like the word impact fee, but I like the opportunity to increase permit fees just to say this is going towards transportation. Maybe not right there on your road, but somewhere across the entire community, because people like to know the known. So if there's a way that we could do that, I think we should continue to look forward in that way.
Is there any consensus on A, leaving it as is, or tweaking it, Commissioner Munger?
I'd just like to suggest, I actually like Anthony's proposal of bracketing it and picking that 150 to 250 trips. My suggestion.
I like Commissioner Walsh's suggestion of changing the name.
I agree.
That's a start. Yeah, I mean, obviously, we don't want to do things that are unproductive, nor, we're like the definition of insanity at times. I'd still like to be careful. I mean, I think of like Beatty's Ford Road. If a community were built back in there and there was only one way out to Beatty's Ford Road, and we didn't do any mitigation of the intersection, widening the road aside type of thing, I just hope that we figure out a way to take that into account. If we have limited ways in and out, you could have a big neighborhood back there, or probably not business as much, and they'd get a free ride while others were paying the price.
Would it be good if staff came back to us with a proposal, and we could look into that?
I'd be for that.
I think there's definitely inertia to change it, as usual. But
Okay.
it doesn't seem like they want to remove it. So.
I mean, I do.
Do you?
Yeah. I mean, I live at Beatty's Ford Road, and it's the craziest thing to me that Burtdale is impacted by Gilead and Beatty's Ford. And it's like not even taken into consideration that people who live in Lincoln County wear Beatty's Ford and Highway 73 out. And it's not because of Burtdale. It's because 77's a hot mess, so people take Burtdale to Mount Holly Huntersville to get to 16. So that's why I've been sitting here quiet, because I think this is the most antiquated thing I've learned and witnessed while being on this board, because even with the North State development, the TIA did not have the, I don't want to say intended consequences, but it didn't turn out the way that we thought it was going to turn out. So if you're pro-development, anti-development, nobody's winning with the TIAs, in my opinion. So at least the DOT model, you're somewhere, versus this that we have it's chaos. It's absolute chaos that doesn't reflect our growing town. That's my 2 cents, sorry.
I think it would be a good idea to bring it back, your proposal, and there might be either that proposal or maybe you'll remove it. So, does that seem like?
Okay.
Sounds good. We're making progress. In this time, you could have reviewed the TIA.
Maybe,
right.
maybe.
See you in 7 or 8 minutes.